Standing in This Place is a community arts project by me, Rachel Carter, based on the historic research of Bright Ideas Nottingham and the Legacy Makers. We're going to tell the story of women working in the Midlands textile mills and the enslaved working in the cotton fields in the Americas and the Caribbean. For this special episode of the podcast, I'm joined by the Nottingham Women's History Group, two members, and I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves. So welcome to the podcast, ladies.
Hello, I'm Sian Trafford of Nottingham Women's History Group, and we're thrilled to be asked by Rachel to do this today. We made Rachel's acquaintance a while ago, and she came on our walk, Ladies, Lace and Lawbreakers, written by my colleague here, Mo, who we'll talk in a moment, and asked us to do this podcast, and we were absolutely delighted.
Oh, I'm very pleased. and Mo?
I'm Mo Cooper. I'm a Nottingham-based community historian, semi-retired really, and I've been involved in the Women's History Group since the beginning. And yes, it was after we did our walk around the lace market that we talked a bit more about the connections with every strand of history, really. Every historian in Nottingham needs, when they're reviewing things, to think in the wider global sense. And this really sort of pulled on those threads. So, yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about the work we've done.
Wonderful. So, when I came along on your guided talk, we took a wonderful walk around the lace market area of Nottingham and then had various stops so that you could tell us interesting facts and introduce some of the women that once walked those very streets around the lace market area. So let's start with you, Mo. Is there a favourite story that you have that relates to a woman in that lace market area?
Well, what we don't have is a lot of individual stories of women in the lace market. The reason I developed the talk in the first place is that Nottingham talks a lot about the lace industry and how important it was. Lots of nostalgia, and talks about the great men, Adam's factory and all those sort of things. And I've always worked from a position of, well, what about the people? Be they, sort of community history, really. And I got hold of a copy of a report from 1862. It was a Royal Commission about the lace industry in Nottingham. And there was a sentence there, I'm wondering whether I can even find it, which has stuck with me throughout. And it was by a manager of one of the factories where he said that the lace industry was built on the back of girls aged 12 to 20 than anybody else in the industry. And that really struck with me, that the wealth that was produced in Nottingham was created predominantly by women in the lace industry and the textile industry. They were the labour force. There was always more women than men working there, although they would receive less than half the salary. And we know that Nottingham had more women than men. There was, in terms of surplus women, because women were coming from the rural areas to try and earn a better living in the city. So that sentence has really hit me. But the other thing that was talked about in the report particularly was the conditions of the women. Yeah. We have this notion of big mills, lots of machinery, those sort of things. But actually, after a while, those workers were protected by various legislation that was introduced about hours of work, control of children, particularly working in the industry. But the main really bad conditions and the exploitation of the women was happening in people's homes still. We have this sort of idea that, we had the framework knitters, that finished and we all moved to factories. Not true. There were factories, but women were working, and children as young as 5 years old, were working in the front room or a workshop in somebody's house doing the finishing work, which was the hottest, nastiest bit of work, and there was never any intrusion there or any legislation about conditions. And that's, I say, is very well documented in the Royal Commission, not that it really made much odds.
That's something I've found when I've been researching my own family members that was living and working in the Broadmarsh and Lace Market areas, you know, that there's the head of the household is working in the textile industry, but then you see all the children listed with jobs, you know, winding, carding, bobbin winder, and all of these other little jobs of the children. So I think that family unit working in the home, that cottage industry, is still very much alive, like you've highlighted.
Well, this quite often was a case if they weren't in their own home, they'd have more control of conditions if they were in their own home. They were in other sort of homes belonging to people. I mean, an example, a description from 1841. You'd have 15 to 20 children in a small, low room, 12 foot by 12 foot, working 15 hours a day. And these were in the homes of the overseers that would take the lace to finish off, and it will be, that end product, the guffaring, which I can never say properly, which is the printing of the patterns and things like that. Very, very high temperatures, which were causing women and children, if they survived, to end up with TB, because they'd be in hot, crowded spaces, then out in the cold. They'd end up with spinal difficulties, eye strain particularly, problems with anemia, childbirth, all those sort of things were happening. And there was a statistic from a doctor from the dispensary. There used to be a dispensary on Broad Street next to today's Broadway, and they reported that TB was 1 in 14 in 1852 in that locality. 9 years later, due entirely to the industry, that had increased to 1 in 8. As successful as the lace industry became, the more damage it was doing to the population. And I say it was children, girls and young women that were bearing the brunt of that.
Yes, it was. I think this is what people forget, that yes, it was very successful for the owners, the owners of the warehouses and the mills and so on. But as Mo has said, from that report, it was built on the backs of the workers, women and children. And there was a lace runner, a woman called Mary Bailey, who documented this absolutely beautifully in a poem. She was very, very unusual. She was a working class poet. It's there's a booklet of her poems has just been re-released by Five Leaves Bookshop, and introduced by John Goodrich, who found these and decided that they really needed to be seen by a modern day audience. And there's one called Petition to the British Fair. Fair here means women. The very wealthy women who were buying this lace, because this is the other part of the story, of course. The women who were toiling and making this could never have afforded to have it. So I won't read all the poem, but it starts off, it's called Petition to the British Fair. And you ladies of Britain, we most humbly address, and hope you will take it in hand, and at once condescend on poor runners to think, when dressed at your glasses you stand, how little you think of that lily-white veil that shields you from gazers and sun. How hard have we worked, and our eyes we have strained, when those beautiful flowers we run. So, and it goes on. She's absolutely amazing poet, and I'm so glad that she's been resurrected in a way. She died very young after having 9 children and working, assisting her husband, who was a tailor but who had delicate health. So it is worth remembering the conditions they worked in, even when they came into the factories.
Yeah.
The conditions were, they didn't ameliorate overnight, as I'm sure, Mo can attest.
Could I just ask, so she mentions, she uses a term lace runner.
Mm-hmm.
So could you explain what is a lace runner?
I think it meant, because when lace is made, when you buy lace, you buy it in these narrow panels.
Yeah.
But they are actually made in wide widths, and then you have to undo the widths so that you get the narrow panels.
Oh, I see.
But they also they added. Mo has talked about gophering, which is putting the patterns on. They also, I think, the runners embroidered the patterns on the lace. So, of course, we're talking now before the machine started making it, with almost like early algorithms, I suppose. I don't know how those punched cards worked, but they were the ones who made the patterns of the lace.
I see.
So it was, imagine doing it by candlelight, all hours of the day, for hours and hours on end, for very poor remuneration.
Yeah.
So, and as Mo has said, they had curvature of the spine, they had poor eyesight. It had terrible consequences for their health.
Yeah, gosh, you can, well, you can't really imagine what that must have been like, that kind of lifestyle, and it's clear from the reports then, and listening to first-hand poems and reports, that they were very short-lived, lots of ill health, and many children working there that didn't get into adulthood.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, there's a couple of quotes again from the 1862 report about the position of children, which I think will sort of give a picture of what we're talking about. There's and this is where we can hear the words of women.
Yeah.
Because fortunately in the Royal Commission they did interview a lot of the managers, but they did interview workers as well.
Right.
Of course the workers would have to be very careful about what they say, I think. So we have a Mrs. Smith here who had 3 children aged 11 to 14, and she worked in Wilson's Mill, which I think was in Radford, if I recall. And her family, of course, were very poor, and one of the things she said to the inspector was, I have no complaint to make if my children are beaten. I would rather they were beaten than fined, because obviously anything that you did wrong, you would be fined as a worker, whether you be a child or an adult. But she would rather the child was beaten than lose income into the house. And people were very, very desperate. The managers that were interviewed were all, oh, well, that's because the wages of the children are taken home and drunk by the parents. There was lots of that sort of attitude. But it was desperate. There was another woman, Mrs. Brandreth, who was one of the female managers. She ran a place in Hollowstone, so quite humble really, and she employed 2 children, 6 elder girls, 25 women. And she talks about, last week a man asked me to take a child aged 5. It was the 5th or 6th time they had brought this child to my workshop. The girl showed me she knew how to cut the material, demonstrating that she'd already been out to work and knew how to do it. 5 years old. Mrs. Brandreth didn't employ the child. She didn't actually employ children of that age. But there was that expectation, and lots of workers would. There was a lot of arguments by managers that if we didn't employ children, we wouldn't compete with the French, because obviously the French had a very good reputation in lace. But after looking into this, I found that French very rarely employ children at all. So it was just another excuse for cheap labour.
Yeah.
And an enlightened employer like Adams thought the children should be able to stop work at 7 o'clock at night.
Oh. thanks, Miss Dad. And, you know, could you imagine it today? You know, you've got a 5-year-old and you're getting them in the little uniform and giving them the book bag and, you know, and their lunchbox and sending them off to school for, you know, and with plenty of breaks and chance for fresh air. Then could you imagine stepping back in time and then you're not taking a 5-year-old to school, but you're sending them to the mill, and the mill owner goes, oh, well, we'll let them out at 7 because we're looking after
We're
them.
enlightened.
Yeah.
But there are children of that age working around the world.
There are.
Forced through poverty and
are.
exploitation. So, yeah, we think of it as history, but it's real, a real experience to a lot of people. And it's a reminder about how bleak it would have been.
We're going to take a creative break now and hear a piece by Natalie Williams, age 14. And she's reading from the memoirs of a female lace maker who was born in Nottingham in 1896.
There were only one thing in Nottingham in them days. Nottingham lace, lace mender, and she used to bring it home and look it over. And when she come to a damaged piece at Sherwood factory, and they used to tie a knot and look a bit more, then tie another knot. It'd only be a copper or two. I think wouldn't get much. But my mother used to be sitting all day doing this, mending, and my Aunt Rose, of course, she was my mother's youngest sister, and she learnt me how to do it. And I used to do a bit at night, then these little stitches, what they called stitches, and she'd perhaps give me halfpenny when she took the piece in, you see. But I'd be anywhere where I would get copper. We all worked at Hoseen as we grew older. Hoseen were the only place in Carrington. My sister started there, my eldest sister, when it were only house, but Mr. Burden built that place up from being a house.
What job did you actually do there?
We were all ladies' sanitary towels and set and all that. And of course, we were all classed just like a family affair. When I first went there, I never went to school, but I had to go to work, I'll tell you that. I was about 14 and I went, and they learnt me on a little. And I was supposed to be going on webbing, you see, and our Ada, she was only me and her in this here, called the cellar. Well, she used to be a winder, you know, make the web, the winding to go onto these machines that made the webbing. I was on this here little learning machine. There was an old man sitting in the corner mending the needles for the machine, and it was a big struggle. She'd got 40 thingies to keep going all day long. And when she was looking, I used to go and break all these here bobbins. So anyway, when I got Mr. Fox, the foreman, he was just running down the stairs at the time, down to the cellar where me and her was. And I were on the floor under the machine when she'd hit me, you see. And I'd be on the floor and she were punching me and that. So he wanted to know what the matter. So she says she's breaking all my cottons down. And every time I come up here, all the things is broke down. So I was outed from there, rustled. I was sent back onto another machine, into another room to learn something else.
Thank you, Natalie. And we're going to return to the memoirs of a lace maker shortly. We stopped outside what's now a pub, but there was such a fascinating history, and I believe it used to be a chapel as well, but it's got quite a very mixed history, hasn't it?
It has. It's the Old Angel, and there's been a pub there since the 1600s. It's another Grade 2 listed building, and it's got quite a colourful history. It's been a brothel, a chapel, and a public house. It's a public house today. And it's got a top floor, on the top floor where the chapel is, with its beautiful arched windows. There's a music space now today, and it is called the Chapel. Like many pubs in Nottingham, it's got caves underneath, and these are, I haven't seen them, Mo might have, they've been hollowed out actually in the shape of a crucifix. I should imagine that's quite atmospheric if you can get down there. And it was also the site of 2 murders back in the 1700s. A policeman and a prostitute who is said to haunt the place to this day. I've not been party to any of this, but Mo, I don't know if you can add any more about that, or no? I wonder.
It's a good place to go for a drink.
It is, and eat actually, and eat. Yes. And take a sneaky peek upstairs. That's what I did. That's what I do anyway. So don't invite me to your house, because I will, like a TV policeman, I will make an excuse. Could I just use the bathroom? And I'll go and scope it all out. But I went upstairs. I wasn't aware of this chapel, and found myself in this amazing space. So, it's definitely worth a visit.
They've got the old pews still there, and they've rigged up what looks like a pulpit, which I think is where the DJ stands. Very, very atmospheric.
Yes.
And a good place to hire for a party.
And just look out for the
ghost.
The prostitute and the policeman that might come in there, have a little, visit to your party.
Don't disturb them.
Gosh. So it's the lace market area is just so fascinating, isn't it? Because you've just got that combination of rich and poor. You've got every sort of walk of life living and working in this area, and you can still see little bits of it today, can't you? And so I
think because the lace market, it was around High Pavement. That was one of the earliest areas that was made a conservation area. So those buildings have survived, whereas if you go somewhere like Maid Marian Way, when Nottingham was in there, let's knock it all down, or the Narrow Marsh, some people would argue, Jury Hill, all that. These were substantial buildings, and some of the buildings there, to talk a little bit about impressive architecture, they did make a statement about a change in workers' conditions, in that if you take the Adams building particularly, that was designed by an architect. Most of them you just get a builder, a surveyor, who would just build you a block and you moved in. But the architectural design there, which shows a sort of E shape really, was designed to maximise daylight. So the hardest parts of the process would be in the top floor, where you'd get maximum light. But each area, the architect had looked to see, how can I make sure that this is as airy as possible and as light as possible. And so that was actually saying something about an employer. I know I was laughing at him before, but he was attempting to make a better condition of work. Mind you, all the workers had to go into the chapel first thing in the morning and say their prayers, because he was a bit of an evangelical Anglican, R. Adams. They had separate stairs apparently for the men and the women, so there was no mixing. But the majority of his employees were adult women.
Right, I have been in that top floor of that building when I went to visit the fine arts students that currently use that top floor, and it's just got all these lovely sort of pent ceilings and lots of glass. It's a great space for artists to use because of the natural light.
And there was a good one of his managers, there's a guy called Pratt, made a statement again that stuck with me, though I probably can't find it, which is, how do you address the conditions of the working classes? And he said what you have to do is raise the women, raise the educational opportunities, he said standards for women, and that will raise the working class. And that's a mantra that will be used throughout the world again as a way to ensure you have permanent development in an area. There were some enlightened employers, but very much in their own, only if you do as you're told, sort of thing.
You've got the quote here, Mo. The only way that I can see to improve the condition of the working classes generally is to raise the females by education. That's
the quote. Good old Mr. Pratt.
Let's hear another piece from our female lace maker born in 1896, performed by Natalie Williams.
How much did they pay you? Do you remember?
We used to jar a penny farthing a gross.
How long did you have off before you had the baby?
Ooh, I went to work till I was about 7 months, only about 2 months before.
And when did you go back again?
Ooh, a long while. Ooh, I was preg, you know. Our mother used to say to me, I don't know how you do it.
Was there any sort of trade unions at Hoseen?
Ooh, no, not like that. Well, I don't know whether I was there or whether I was at Lewis's, but Lewis's was on St. Answell Road, and when she was about 3, my mother said, well, I'll look after Joyce. I says, well, I've got to work, ma'am, because the money ain't enough to keep us on. So she says, all right then. I says, there's a winder wanted at Lewis's, and I knew a girl who worked there, so I went to her house. It was one Sunday morning, and I says, well, what sort of winding is at Lewis's? She says, well, there's all sorts, straight winding, cock winding, and small winding. I says, because they want somebody. So she says, I know they do. But she were a bit dopey, and so I says, well, what time did you go? She says, 6 in the morning till 6 at night. Now this was a hard life for me. Some girls, some women wouldn't have done it, but I did. I wanted to always keep up to what I'd been used to, so I decided mother'd have Joyce when she was 3.
To be a slip winder, what did you have to do?
Well, you'd got to your bobbins on, you know, like spools on it, pull 'em through a wheel and the wheel there.
Came in over your head? 2 wheels that came in over your head?
Yeah, over the back of the machine. There were 40. You'd got to be quick, and you'd got to keep 40 going, and you'd got proper knots, you see. Knots, which had to go on a machine. If your work broke, and people thought these spools for the hosiery, if you didn't do a flat knot, which is like that, you would have to, like a cross, and take your winding round your cotton, round it, and pull it. And you always had little scissors on you, little scissors, so it wouldn't break the needle. It were hard work, and on your feet all day.
Thank you, Natalie, for that fantastic reading of a memoir of a lace maker. And Natalie is part of the Yard Youth Theatre Group at the New Art Exchange here in Nottingham. So let's return back to our lace makers and workers. Looking at sort of working conditions and the buildings and the architecture, so we did walk from that impressive Adams building to quite a bit of a building that's needing some love, where you could see the old windows on the top floor. So that's another feature of a lot of buildings that still survive around Nottingham, is looking for those lace makers' windows. Mm-hmm. So could you give us a bit of a description of what to look for when we're looking for those kind of windows where they would have been working in the top floor of a smaller building?
The best example that you'll find is on Broad Street near the Broadway, and that's 26 to 30 Broad Street. And there you've got 3 little houses really, which are described as old weavers' workshops, again listed with Historic England, so they will stay with us hopefully. And some elements of those buildings go back to the 17th century, so very early, with lots of additions. And what you will see on the top floor is they will maximise the light, again, getting into the building. So you will often have a long window, rather than 6 individual windows. You'll probably have 3, but they'll be long. And you see this replicated throughout Nottingham. And some of the new developments and the additions to the new developments, all this student accommodation, you can see they're sort of trying to mirror that as well, which is quite nice. But the other building that we visited on Barkergate looked like a grand little mansion, but again, top floor, this is on the corner of opposite the ice ring. You can see that they've extended it and added a top floor with long windows to maximise light, so people were running a bit of an industry there. But I say you can see it. It's really, for those that are interested, Nottingham is fascinating because you can catch so much from the roof line, the parapets, the windows, but you've got to stop looking at the floor or the phone,
look up,
and things like that.
Look up.
Join us for the next episode, where we'll continue our walk around Nottingham's lace market with the Nottingham Women's History Group.